This lesson is negative assumptions are always false. Now, this might seem crazy to you, very, very foreign, but this is the way the healed mind thinks. The healed mind doesn't see an attack, doesn't see people deserving of attack, is able to, if you're going to make an assumption, to make a positive one that's going to allow you to have peace regardless of what's happening. Now, just because people if you make a negative assumption false does not mean that what the other person's behavior is doing is okay or justified or doesn't need boundaries and correction. What we're saying though is your perception is going to either cause you suffering because it's going to be a distortion of the truth, or it's going to give you peace and usually compassion because it's a perception that's based into truth. So the truth will set you free. The truth will bring you peace. It's our distortion of the truth that says that there's bad people. There's people that are deserving of attack that actually reflects our own psychology of attacking ourselves and thinking that we're bad or having guilt and shame. And this comes from childhood. So looking at your childhood, when were people made negative assumptions of you? Even we often fear other people making negative assumptions about us. So we'll behave in a way that's maybe not authentic out of fear of people making assumptions. But the truth is that there are no bad people and negative assumptions are false. So let's break this down a little bit because it is a hard concept until you start to practice it and really look at every time you make a negative assumption. And you're actually, when you're able to verify, especially if you can verify with the person by asking them their experience, you will find that the negative assumption is always false. So assumptions are not facts, okay? So they're based in belief. And they're also based on past perception. So what's happened in the past will create an assumption for the future. So if in the past you were a victim in some way, or you perceive that you are being victimized or being attacked, that is going to cause you to make the assumption that someone else is doing that in the future when the behavior from another person is similar to what's happened in the past. So this is a fear-based driver. So you're afraid of, so it's based on fear, and there's fear that's, I'm so afraid of feeling unloved the way that I did before. And then we put up this wall. So by assuming the worst of people, we put up this wall. And then it comes from a lack of self-compassion. So one of the ways you can test your theory, my favorite way, is to look at yourself, look at your life, look at your mind, look at any time that you've ever done anything that people said that made you bad or wrong, or that you deserved attack. Now, we're not saying that the behavior you did was okay. It probably wasn't okay. It was probably something that was less than loving to yourself or others. But if you look at the way you were thinking at that time, it was never because you were a bad person or because you were just a jerk. It was because you were hurting and you were expressing your pain in that moment. And that was your best. Again, doesn't mean it was okay, but it was your best. And when we start shifting to I'm a bad person, or I deserve guilt and shame, to wow, I was really hurting to behave that way. I was in a lot of pain to have that behavior. That wasn't about anybody else. That was about what was not healed in me. We can fully see that. That's how we're going to be able to see that about other people. And then the positive assumption will be, when that loved one fell into addiction, instead of just saying, oh, they're an alcoholic, or we're labeling them like narcissistic, it has an energy that they deserve attack, when really at the time when someone falls into addiction, like say drinking or drugs, that is their best. That is what they're doing to survive. When you are deeply struggling with a lack of self-love, this is what you'll turn to in order to cope with life and to get through. And then when you're impaired, you're more likely to have behaviors that are less in alignment with who you truly want to be, because you have guilt and shame and self-attack. And it's just this vicious cycle of self-attack and self-harm, and maybe even harming other people. Again, the behavior of attacking or hurting another person is not okay, and it does deserve boundaries. But it's not because the person's a bad person. It's not because they deserve guilt or shame or attack, but rather they deserve love. They're calling for love. So when we shift from, that person cut me off because they're just an asshole, or that person ignored my text because they just don't care, that is a negative assumption that makes us perceive ourselves as being attacked by the other person's behavior. And it's incorrect because attack isn't real. That's our next step. We're over here now. Okay. There's no bad people. This is the truth. There's no bad people. Attack is not real. So people will either express love or a call for love. So if anyone's expressing anything to you, it's one of those two. It's not because they're expressing that they're a horrible person and they deserve attack, but rather that they're hurting and they don't know what to do. And somehow this in this moment this is their best. Even if it's not okay, it's still their best. And sometimes it's just an expression that is neutral. Sometimes it isn't an expression, as I says. It isn't as an is not an expression. Rather, it's neutral. This happens a lot when we make assumptions about people, the way that they communicate. So not getting back to us and then thinking that they don't care about us. When it's likely this happens to me sometimes when I'm in session. People will call me and then I'm in session and I'm so focused on my patient. I just quickly like slide it to the left and it'll be, 10 o'clock at night before I realize, or sometimes I don't even realize that someone had messaged me because I was so focused in my session that and when I dismissed it, I didn't register in my brain that this was happening. That was my best. It's completely neutral. But it's easy for people if you have this philosophy that negative assumptions are false or true, that you can assume negative things and be correct. It'd be really quick to be able to say, oh, wow, Amanda just doesn't care about me. Amanda doesn't value me, when it really had more to do with what my brain was capable of that time and it was really neutral. It had no meaning. There was no meaning attached to it from my point. The meaning that that person had ascribed to it was because they were hurting. So it was actually reflective of a lack of self-love when we make negative assumptions. And that's that piece over there about a lack of self-compassion. So if you're attacking yourself and saying, I'm a horrible person, this happened to me recently. I had a patient that said, I'm a really bad person. And they need to be told, you are absolutely not a bad person. The things that you've done were because you were hurting so deeply and you're struggling with self-love so deeply. It doesn't make you a bad person. That makes you a person that's suffering, that's in pain. You're in the depths of hell. But the way out is love. So using this lesson, so whenever we get a lesson, it's a nice idea to repeat it throughout the day. So saying negative assumptions are always false, and then guard your thoughts from assumptions. Identify assumptions when you're making them, and then play them out. So if somebody cuts you off, your first thought is, oh my gosh, they're a jerk. If you're going to make an assumption, make a positive one. Okay, so an assumption means you don't know what the truth is. So when that person cuts you off, or that person's driving, let's say they're driving really, really slow in front of you, and you think, oh, they're just doing that to piss me off. Okay, that's the assumption. But a positive assumption might be, I wonder what's going on with that person. Maybe they're having anxiety about driving. Maybe they were in a car crash a few days ago and all their airbags went off and they don't want to drive. Don't feel ready to drive, but they have to go get their kid and take them to the doctors, and they feel like this is the best they can do right now is go 40 kilometers in a 60. And then you can shift to compassion with that positive assumption. And then that anger within you that wants to honk on your horn or aggressively pass them, it'll just subside. And this is one of the ways that you can have so much peace in your life, by removing negative assumptions and not seeing people as bad or labeling them in certain ways, but rather seeing that they're hurting, they don't know what to do. One of the labels that comes up a lot is narcissism. So people will read on the internet, what is narcissistic personality? And they'll have the criteria and then they'll use the label, and they're not using the label incorrectly. The issue with that word is there's an assumption to it that this is bad, that this makes them bad. It's a choice. It means that, they deserve attack. When really, what if someone who has narcissistic personality traits is just somebody that deeply doesn't love themselves. And they often have trauma of abuse and neglect in their childhood. This is someone who calls for love a lot. And imagine if instead of using the word narcissistic, we said, oh, I know this person who calls for love a lot. They're hurting a lot and they need a lot of love and boundaries. right? Imagine a world like that where we no longer attacked people, but rather with compassion, we're able to see them correctly, which is that there's no bad people. We're all doing our best. We all deserve love. Attack is never justified in any form, and negative assumptions are always false. And if we shift to positive assumptions or just seeing things as neutral, we will have so much more peace in our lives. So negative assumptions are always false. Work on this week. Remind yourself on the daily to look for negative assumptions that you have in your mind, shifting those perceptions using your CBT skills. How can I see this differently? And changing the thoughts to have effect on your emotions and then your behavior so that your emotions are calm and you're not honking the horn or yelling or getting aggressive or even getting a boundary with aggression. I hope that's helpful. Peace.